Wow, pancakes in space. I kind of like it. You know, would that be something where the spatula could be like the spaceship or something like that, and flipping pancakes from planet to planet? I'm liking this theme for trajectory, and I'm really excited about our pancake breakfast today. We are so looking forward to this conversation. The topic is why DevOps isn't 100% working for most teams and how to fix it. And our guests today include Cody De Arkland, Principal Technical Marketing Engineer at LaunchDarkly, Rachel Stevens, Senior Analyst at RedMonk, Steve George, Chief Operating Officer at Weaveworks, and Margaret Francis, President and COO at Armory. I am so excited for this. It's always fun to get together for pancakes. I brought some of mine in. You know, I'm going to hold off on eating them because, you got to be careful when you're eating on set. I've learned that the hard way. Could I just ask a question? Rachel, I understand you actually were the smartest one of us all. What's up with your pancakes?
I have two small children and it's a weekday morning, so there was absolutely no chance of me making pancakes, but I have a really lovely plate of pancakes that I ordered. So,
And let's give a shout out to the restaurant again. What is it?
It's called Snooze. They do like kind of cult pancakes in the Denver area. So definitely.
Well, Snooze, thank you for participating in our podcast today. Your pancakes, I'm sure, are awesome. So, can anyone pass me syrup or butter or anything? Margaret, could you pass it up a little bit up to? Okay,
since we're doing product placements, I'm kind of a maple syrup maniac. And while this is my everyday, it's real maple syrup as opposed to some kind of corn syrup with dye business. I love this brand, Run Amok. And they cure a lot of their maple syrup in like bourbon barrels. Kind of pancake to cocktail motion. It's excellent.
Wow. Pancakes to cocktails. I like that. So who else has something to share here? Cody?
I locked in the breakfast. Kids were really, really happy with pancakes this morning. A little sausage action, little flapjack. Feeling good.
Wow, that sounds delicious. And how about Steve? What do we got?
Yeah, so I don't know if you can see, but here, these are some pancakes. I'm in France, so I'm actually in the Alps, which is why I've got my Alps map behind me. And I don't know if you can see, but this is some French mountain honey. I don't know if I can get that on the camera. There you go. Some French mountain honey to go with mine.
Wow. We have restaurant pancakes from Denver. We have bourbon and pancakes from somewhere in the Bay Area. Wow, this is pretty good. Joe, do you got anything today? Nope. Thanks, though, Joe. Joe Jackson is our executive editor, and Joe is going to be helping field the questions today and just participating with questions that he may have of his own. So let's just get started. Now, I want to just let everyone out there know that we love your questions. You know, do you have any questions based on the conversation we're having? We want to hear, your questions about DevOps teams. How are you working with DevOps teams? And what changes have you had to make with DevOps teams? These are the kind of questions that we're getting answered today. And the question really is, why aren't DevOps teams working for most teams? What's happening in your neck of the woods that you can maybe ask a question about? So let's just get started with our questions. And so I want to just start it off maybe just with a very, simple one about, what we're seeing in the world. I mean, workloads and applications are shifting to the cloud. That's no surprise. We're seeing a real requirement for better software delivery because, as we well know, it can be all kinds of issues can start popping up now that we have just latency issues to think about, almost more than the app and services going down. We've seen from Gartner that through the 2023, 90% of DevOps initiatives will fail to fully meet expectations, according to Gartner. The question really is why. So maybe I can go to the first question, to Cody. How have trends changed the way DevOps teams work? I mean, I remember asking someone at O'Reilly Conference 2007. I'm like, "What is DevOps?" And the guy said, "Oh, it's a culture." And that's what I think what we've heard ever since. Cody, what are your thoughts? What are the trends? What's going on out there?
Yeah, I think what's really interesting is when you look at, I think we're in a really cool time of DevOps, because we've been in this like kind of like theory crafting stage for a very long time, where we've been kind of building the foundation of what DevOps actually becomes. But we're at this time where like tooling and general like cultural approach to it has reached a level where people can actually start executing on things. And I think we've seen that over probably the past year, and I think things like the pandemic have sped that up as people are kind of operating more independently. I think an interesting trend, getting like super specific, is I see tooling coming back around as a very important part of this. I think we've moved past like the whole waterfall versus agile thing, and we're looking at how do we use kind of tools to solve problems for things. I think we have like a great set of tools on this panel that are great examples of taking larger, bigger problems and breaking them up into smaller things that are more solvable. And I think that tooling has gotten to a place where we can actually use those things more effectively. So when I talk to people in this space, I come from a pretty ops heavy background. So when I talk to like former colleagues, people who are still out solving problems in enterprise, a lot of them, like the first questions we ask aren't how do I get into DevOps? It's, hey, what tools should I start to learn? What things should I focus on? What areas should I give attention to? Infrastructure as code, things like that. But I think it's really interesting to see how that tooling approach is starting to become a way to create standardization inside of businesses, ways to solve problems the same way across an entire team at great scale, because that's how you create scale. I think tooling is making a big kind of comeback around now.
Is that your perspective? Is tooling making a comeback? Are we seeing a lack of tools needed for what we're seeing today in the developer community?
I think there's two parts to that answer. I think one of the parts very much augments what Cody is saying, in that I think that when people really talk about DevOps is a culture, and therefore it's all about people and process over tooling, and people can kind of have that skepticism that someone who's trying to sell you DevOps tooling is kind of glossing over the fact that you have to have that cultural part. And tools, I think, are a really important part of augmenting and building your culture. You can't change the culture all by yourself. You have to have the tooling to support it. So I 100% agree with that philosophy. At the same time, one of the things that we are seeing a lot at RedMonk is that people are just really struggling with the fragmentation of the developer toolchain overall. And so it can be a bit of a developer experience gap, is the phrase that one of my colleagues has used to describe this, of trying to get something that's written on your laptop all the way to production. And the number of tools and things that have to be integrated to make that happen can be really daunting for a lot of companies. So I think on one hand, tools are absolutely essential. On the other hand, managing all of those tools and figuring out how to put that tool chain all together is something that a lot of companies are struggling with.
There's a lot of options out there, aren't there, Margaret? So there's this fragmentation, this dev experience gap. What's the responsibility of the vendor in that case? I mean, you're working with Armory, and you're the president of Armory, for goodness sake. So
I actually just even made a live pancake, so my house smells amazing, even if I won't get to eat it till later.
are you on TikTok? Are you on TikTok? Because that's like second level right there.
It's a continuous delivery of pancakes while talking, taking it to the next level of Wednesday morning difficulty. So yeah, I'm from a vendor, so I'm pretty sure I'm supposed to be using this time to like sell the thing that I do, and that's frankly not useful. It's not useful because Cody and Rachel are spot on. Like, teams are really struggling with how they're going to put together like consistent paths to production. What is the best kind of set of tools to standardize on? How can that possibly work for like all of the teams in the enterprise, or even just the ones you're like adjacent to that contribute to the same application that you support? Where we're in a microservices world where everybody owns their own service. Their services all contribute to the app. The teams all work slightly differently. Standardization is hard. So it's kind of a little bit of a chaotic moment in DevOps, But I think that what I see is when a team gets into a groove, like they actually are able to standardize on a tool chain and a set of practices, they really do get the velocity benefits and the consistency benefits that they were looking for when they chose those tools to begin with. I do see it. It's just not global yet.
Steve, is this the moment of chaos that we've all been waiting for?
Yeah, I mean, my perspective for us at Weaveworks, we're very Kubernetes centric. And so, we've been talking a lot about GitOps, which we see as an instantiation of DevOps. And I think we're seeing the same thing that the others are commenting on. I mean, in the wider the wider DevOps context, I've always liked that kind of calm definition, culture automation, lean, measurement sharing. I really like that as a way of thinking through that problem. One of the things you notice with, you referred to at the start that the Gartner study, one of the things I think is true is that different companies and teams have different goals. And so often they struggle with exactly which parts of DevOps are important to them, determining their goals. And I think in the Kubernetes world, the best instantiation of this we see is teams that started off wanting to deploy applications faster, and they land up building Kubernetes platforms for extremely long periods of time. And so I think for us, we talk about GitOps as a way of having a journey towards that DevOps outcome, whatever that outcome is that you want. And I think that's you can, whether it's Kubernetes or some other method that you're using, I think keeping that in mind, that you've got a beginning goal that you were trying to get to, and then moving towards that step by step and measuring whether this is working for you or not. I think that's the real trick of successful projects. And then the tooling and the culture comes as part of that successful mix.
Journey? Did you say journey? Don't stop believing? Oh my gosh! What? Talk about
in a metrics-driven way. In a metrics-driven way, right? It's not in a never-ending journey, but definitely something that you can iterate and progress towards. I think
that's a good way of putting it. Now, Joe, what do we got out there? Who's asking questions?
Well, we got a real good one from one of the listeners who references the DORA report. Now, this is the State of the DevOps report that comes out every year. The last report noted that there's a lot of discussion around the differences between DevOps and site reliability engineering. That's a topic we've been seeing a lot lately. So where does DevOps stop and the SRE begin?
Oh, that's such a good question. Who's going to take it?
I get from like an academic perspective. So I think one of the things that was interesting about the DORA report this year is that they changed some of their language. So they kind of have that operational metric that they have done, which they previously were calling availability. And they have shifted that this year to call it reliability, which is kind of a broader and more encompassing set of concerns beyond just availability, but it's also latency and performance and kind of the general state of the app on the operational side. And I think from one sense, that's kind of just the prerequisites that you kind of need to have in place in order for DevOps to be effective. I think SRE is kind of the implementation of DevOps. Like DevOps is getting everything through the pipeline, and SRE is having the platform that can run it. But I would love to hear people who are actually doing the technical work. If you have perspectives, that would be great.
Cody's giving a thumbs up.
I think you're spot on. I think that lines up perfect. I think that ultimately, like, if I get very specific, SRE is the role that you hire, and DevOps is the set of like culture and approaches that SRE engineer is going to implement as part of their role. Now, there's a whole bunch of SRE specific things that they bring to the table as well, and lessons they've learned, and so on and so forth. But I think that that DevOps is going back to where we started this whole conversation around like the culture side and kind of like those general approaches. I think that DevOps is that viewpoint, the way you're looking at the problems you're trying to solve, and the SRE is the person generally like implementing it. I think there's that's like my formal answer. There's a snarky side where people will oftentimes like attach to job titles, and they'll be like, I'm the DevOps engineer at place, or I'm the SRE at place. I think that's another way you can look at it, where they do create different roles for those. But I generally see those ending up being very similar groups that are chasing similar problems anyways. I just think that ultimately, like, the DevOps thing is more of a culture approach and a way we tackle the big problems that we're trying to solve.
I would even add to that I think sometimes we give things names so that we can normalize the way that we talk about them and recognize how important they are. And I've seen a lot of title migration over the last like decade or so. So now sometimes people who are doing what I would categorize as SRE type tasks are just engineers. They're just engineers, and they view this as part of their job description because we've so normalized how important the culture of DevOps is that we don't have to even give it the name anymore. And we tend to name it when it's important for us to foreground it in defining the actual work that our engineers, our practitioners, and our builders are actually doing every day.
Live from the kitchen, Margaret. I like that. You know, one of the things that I'm curious about is basically what Cody says is like, you know, if you want to get a high paying job, you can call yourself a DevOps engineer, and you can, be in the running, and of course you got to be good enough to get the job. But I always thought that SREs are focusing on, they're like the ones like watching everything. They're making sure like, as a DevOps team is building out, software and services, they're focused on the delivery mechanism, and then the SRE is like making sure that the systems are resilient. And if they need to like make sure that that there needs to be kind of some change in the DevOps, workflow or process, and they can say, hey, there's something going wrong here. Is that a, is that a way to look at it from your perspective, Steve, or do you have other thoughts?
I mean, I think SRE is, if you follow the sort of classical SRE text from Google, it's an opinionated way of particularly running a large number of services at scale. And that's what it really speaks to. I mean, it's measurement centric, it's developer centric in the sense of, automation, which Cody was referring to. And I think those are really important aspects. And it fits within a particular type of pipeline that works for teams where you have a need to have a team that is dealing with a platform that is keeping that platform capable, and then you have services running on that and individual services teams associated, and you're at that scale where you need that kind of platform capability and that ability to keep automating and running the platform at scale. I think DevOps is less opinionated. It's, I would say SRE and DevOps are really part of the same thing. But I think really kind of with DevOps, it's less opinionated about the specifics about how you implement that within your team context. Ultimately, DevOps is saying bring dev and ops teams together and improve communications, tooling, use some of the, they're all the same contemporary capabilities. Whereas I would say SRE is very much something that I talk to teams which are operating at quite large scale about, and they've reached a point, and this, you see this in all platforms and in all technology areas, where when you reach sufficient scale, you land up taking generalists and then re-specializing them at different levels. And SRE is a particularly opinionated specialization view of how you scale.
I do like that. Just to back up Steve, I really like the way of framing that around the idea that like the SRE side of it is very opinionated, because that is true, right? There are things that SREs tend to very much gravitate towards from a process, metrics, tool chain, not so much tool chain in the sense of like what product I use, but the realm I live in. SREs are very generally very specific in what they're chasing, whereas DevOps is really like a series of practices that you can kind of mix and match out of at times. So I really like that framing, Steve.
Awesome.
I do too, and I agree that it's like a scale function where you have to develop that differentiation and specialization when you hit a certain point of scale, and the individual teams can no longer have kind of total ownership of their service without providing like a more platform view where a number of different services have to be managed by different teams. And I think that point happens in every org at a different scale inflection point, but it's good to be mindful about when you are changing the org to suit your business purposes and how you do it.
I believe we do have another question, or even, I think it may even look like a statement. Joe, what do we got?
Well, yes, Ethan Waldo had he put forth a challenge that any DevOps team to rebuild their entire infrastructure without making any modifications within 6 months. There's a lot of interesting things happening here. To what extent do you feel that DevOps success can be hindered by legacy software?
The goal, I think in my mind, is not to have your infrastructure stay static for half a year at a time. I don't think that we want to be challenging people. I think that's part of the premise, is that we want to make sure that we are building flexible infrastructure and resilient infrastructure. And so as we have new security vulnerabilities, as we're advancing our application, as we're making kind of progress towards delivering customer value, your infrastructure is inherently going to shift as you do that. So I think part of it is like, I would love to hear kind of the Weaveworks perspective on GitOps and how that enables you to like build and have kind of declarative infrastructure. I think that's part of it, but I don't think the goal is to have static infrastructure.
Yeah, that doesn't make sense to me. Like, what if your stove, you could only use it every 6 months, and like, so like the whole time you're preparing to make pancakes, for that one opportunity. I mean, that's kind of a stretch, I know, but
There's an interesting thing here on like the way I'm used to, like when I was at the enterprise before I crossed over into vendor world, we'd have that idea of like the one application deployment a year for a business, a bit line of business, right? Like you'd have this project that had built up for 3-4 months and was, now we're deploying it, and now it's deployed and we're moving on with our lives. But I think like one commonality that we all have, like as panelists on this, we all live kind of in a continuous world. Like all about the products that we represent, the things we do, kind of are designed to help people continuously do the things that we're trying to accomplish in little slices of the pie that we're working on. And I think that that's very comparative to how like the market is now and how the world is. Like we're looking at ways to continuously evolve infrastructure and the way these environments grow and contract based on performance, scale, needs. I think that we're in kind of the era of continuous things happening, and it's all about how do we do that with the minimal risk? How do we enable teams to do that faster? How do we have people get less 2 a.m. calls when something goes wrong with that? But we are very much in the realm of continuous evolution of the things that we do.
Yeah, I mean, just adding to that, with building off what Rachel was saying, teams sort of seem to face two problems at the moment. One problem is choosing the components in their system, but then this other one is they're dynamically changing environments. So they don't want to be rebuilding their environments every 6 months. But the most common thing I think that you see with teams now is going into environments and they tell you what they're running. It turns out that's not what they're running. And so in a dynamic environment, they think they're running a particular version, they're running something completely different. In a dynamic environment that teams are now in a continuous deployment world, in a world where you're trying to get those features as quickly as possible to market, you have to accept that everything is going to be continuous, and therefore anything which is unmanaged is absolutely a risky proposition. So whilst I wouldn't necessarily challenge teams to rebuild their entire environment from the ground up every 6 months, I think it's a really interesting idea that anything that you think you can't do that with, anything which is not managed, is a really risky proposition now.
So I want to just get back to just a fundamental question. What does this mean? Is DevOps not working for most teams? I mean, it seems like we're seeing there's always solutions to problems, but what really isn't working now? What is it that's really difficult for teams?
The scariest thing for me when we see these like larger DevOps transformation projects and like these larger, we're adopting DevOps, is people focus on the forest of it, and they say like there's a million things that we want to do as part of this DevOps migration, and we end up bucketing all of these things into this DevOps project instead of looking at it like pragmatically and saying, what's my low hanging fruit? What are solvable problems that we can get a lot of agility, a lot of velocity off of? Like staying away from my own product, like looking at something like that Steve works on, just because I'm familiar with Weaveworks, like solving the problem of how to continuously build Kubernetes clusters as code, have a central point of GitOps, and being able to control that from there. Like these are solvable problems that get great velocity out of teams that are trying to solve how to continue to do that, right? Especially when we talk as like continuously, how do we build, like it goes back to what I said at the beginning around tooling, like how do we start to adopt these tooling that let us solve these low-hanging fruit problems often? I think it fails when people stop looking at low-hanging fruit and they say, how am I going to pick every apple off of this tree? And more so, how am I going to pick every apple off of 100 trees across 10 data centers, and then it just becomes an unsolvable problem. I think it fails when people don't focus on the tangible things they can solve in low-hanging fruit. Interested in other people's opinions. That's just my take.
Cody, was it you that said iterate and progress earlier in this conversation? Because I agree completely. If you can iterate and progress in the correct direction, you'll get benefits. But it's when you try and pick off the whole thing all at once and solve for all the complexity that things can kind of go wrong. I'm going to shill for both of your products very briefly because I think there are two problems that I see people overcoming. The first is the security review process is like kind of a nightmare in almost every organization that I know. So one of the things that I think is really great about the LaunchDarkly approach is like, hey, my features, my code are out in production, and I can do this kind of feature flagging approach to expose or not expose it to users. This means you're getting a lot of power out of the deployments that you make. And, it simplifies DevOps to some extent to not have to do like every feature kind of a thing release independently. And then the other thing I'll just say about Kubernetes is that everyone is struggling with how to deal with Kubernetes in actual production and operation. It's unsolved in its totality, but the teams that I see getting Kubernetes workloads out to production are getting the benefits of like, I can change where those clusters run, I can scale them up. If I can do it in one place in like a Kubernetes API compliant way, I can do it everywhere. And now all of a sudden I'm delivering on that thing that like, the CTO said we were going to do like 5 years ago. It's actually working. So I do see progression. I just don't see like, kind of full solution in a lot of places that Armory is operating in anyway.
I feel like someone should chill for Armory too. I think CI/CD is one of the most important elements that we see in people trying to build modern DevOps practices, and having that capability is really a core element of being able to deliver software well. And so tools like Spinnaker are, there's plenty of ways you can build a CI/CD pipeline, but Spinnaker is definitely one of the ones that we see modern shops adopting. And so I think, as Margaret said, like all of the tools that are represented by panelists here are really interesting in kind of modern development practices.
Yeah, just to join sort of Margaret and Cody's point together, I think the thing that really helps where teams get bogged down is when it's too big to bite. And what you need is a really good use case, a really good example that you can promote internally within the organization. And CD is a great way. Some progression along the path of CD really helps dev teams. When they start seeing it, it's easier to deploy. Whatever that application or service is, it's such a big proof point. And I always tell people that they should actually start with the application layer, because that's the kind of fire of excitement that will go through the rest of the organization when they see that. Yeah, sure, deploying infrastructure is really hard. It's very, very important. But at the end of the day, if you want all of your development teams on side and excited about this and motivated, then show them deploying some applications using CD, and they're just, that's your marketing buzz internally.
But I mean, to that point, there's a cool culture call out here, right? In the sense of like giving people wins, right? Like I don't think we do that enough in the tech world. We're often focused on like these big enterprise problems, but ultimately these are people building these platforms. And like the CD place is a great place to give yourself wins and to feel good about the work you're doing and have tangible things that you can show and say, yeah, like I was able to automate this deployment process and make it move 4 times faster than it was before, and we were able to do 4 times more, right? Like I'm a big believer in giving teams wins and things that they can feel really good about, because that's how they get excited. That's how they get curious to see how they can do more, how they can explore more. So there's an interesting cultural angle there of like the creation of a winning feeling.
I like that winning feeling. We do have some questions coming in. Joe, what are people asking about out there in trajectory land?
All right, fantastic. Well, we had an interesting comment from Chris Felix, who had noted that finding people that also have development experience, finding operations people who also have experience in development is kind of difficult for most enterprises, and which kind of leads to the question, if an operations person has development experience, why wouldn't they just move to development? But anyway, maybe the panelists could address the challenges and offer possible solutions for finding these rare DevOps people.
Steve, take the stage.
Sure. I mean, I think that is totally true. I mean, we've had enterprise teams have been split for an incredibly long period of time, so it's totally possible for you to be at any point in your career and have no experience in one or the other. I think that's really the importance of developing or delivering an application platform that we were referring to at the beginning, because that helps to remove a lot of the kind of complexities. So I think one good model that I see enterprise teams picking is to build a small, capable application platform that will get the jobs of deploying your applications, looking after them, observing them, understanding them. So just the start, not your full enterprise platform, and then circulating teams around that and building new services which use that platform. And I think of that as being like a sort of the little bit of grit that the pearl is going to grow around, because that gets teams excited. It gives teams the sort of capabilities, and it lets you talk about that internally within the enterprise. And then you've got enough skills and capabilities and personnel who are excited about it that you can then start to deploy it into wider groups and so forth. So that's sort of, I think, how you can build those skills internally. There's no doubt that those skills are under there's massive amounts of pressure and interest in those skills right now.
You're going to teach him. I don't know a way around this. Like, I think you were spot on. If there's like an advanced team who figures out kind of the way to do it the new best way, and then you start to roll other teams onto that practice, it's the cloud tech team at Apple. It's the Jet team at JPM. It's like there's some kind of innovation team that's going to show the new way to roll like new workloads out onto the new cloud target using a really standardized tool chain. The frustration will come that not all of the legacy stuff is going to work. It's not going to work. And you will not have like 100% adoption of one single way to get to production in pretty much any place like I've ever been. You're just looking for convergence and progression and efficiency and getting like new applications and features out to production. It's progress. It's not final destination on the journey.
But there's no standardization. There's fragmentation. There's development experience issues. These are the broken parts. So do you need an innovation layer on top of the broken parts to fix the broken parts, or does the broken parts need to be fixed with the innovation layer?
You need to find pragmatic ways to make progress against automating the toil away and achieving some repeatability in process and some standardization around skills and tooling. But like, I've never, in any large enterprise, there's going to be 100 ways all the different teams get their workloads out to different, targets down to production. You're looking to whittle that down, improve it over time, converge on some things, and accept that it's maybe like an asymptotic goal to ever have everybody do everything exactly the same way,
But it's the behavior change angle, or the introduction of a new behavior and a new path they might take. I loved your answer. I think that's so true. It's the idea of you can't have people prevent fire while they're fighting a fire, right? Like it's really hard to have an operations team who's in the mix, building systems, trying to keep an environment running, also pausing all of that work to go and learn how to innovate. Because these are new skills. Learning how to build in a CI/CD world is a new set of skills that not everybody came up in the game having. And I think that when you have this team that's focused on innovation and focused on finding those low-hanging fruit things that they can target and exploring the LaunchDarklys of the world and the Armories and the Weaveworks and learning how to gradually and progressively improve their environments, to Margaret's point, you're never going to get to a place where it's 100% the new cool way to do the thing, but you're going to get to a place where the harder problems are a little less hard and the easier problems don't exist anymore. And they've been replaced with a different kind of easy problem because you're just progressively making improvements. You'll fail when you say, I want to eliminate all of the problem. My goal of the DevOps is to eliminate all the thing. And then you never achieve it. And everyone becomes frustrated and bails on it because they never get that win. They never feel accomplished in it.
I see cloud native businesses with relatively new stacks able to do it all one way. I see teams and departments able to do it all one way. I see sets of services that comprise like a whole application, able to do it all one way. So I think it's completely doable at that level, and it is being done and done well. A Patreon, like everybody does it one way. Netflix, does it all one way. But most people exist like in the delta between that, perfect new cloud business and a big enterprise.
There's a lot to absorb here about what we're seeing in DevOps. One question, though, that I'm wondering and how it's affecting DevOps now is the new focus on the software supply chain and security in the software supply chain. And we have an executive order from President Joe Biden. We have, we have lots of really terrible attacks that we've seen, SolarWinds in particular. So there's a lot of discussion about it, and I'm wondering how this is starting to change how DevOps teams look at what they do, and how it may actually help or hinder what they're trying to accomplish. How about we go to Rachel? Do you have any thoughts on the security angle? Is that something you all are looking at
Yeah, honestly, I think everyone's looking at it. I think that software provenance and like software bill of materials are just going to be increasing parts of our conversation as we try to figure out how because apps really aren't. Applications today aren't built like they were maybe a decade ago, where everybody builds a whole application. Like applications today are assembled. And it's a collection of services, it's a collection of libraries, it's a collection of code that some you've written yourself and some you're pulling in from external sources. And the dependencies that exist in applications today are can be really massive. And so understanding where all your software has come from and understanding the provenance about that is an increasing part of how we're going to be thinking about security. And it's really challenging, I think, for a lot of people to start this. One, because I think we have this concept of like shift left that's happening, and we want to move security from being like a gate at the end to something that's incorporated all the way through. Dave Stanke from Google used a phrase I really liked, and he called it like smeared left, which I thought was good. So I think the responsibility still comes over here, but it kind of moves throughout the organization. And I liked that as a concept, but I think the way that we're going to get software security incorporated throughout the process is we really have to be thinking about the developer experience in this and making it easy for developers to choose to do the right thing, kind of having pre-approved libraries or curated sets of choices that they can be working in, good automations, the right defaults, good guardrails in place. I think we have to make it so that the development teams have security as a practice that's not hindering them, but is enabling them to build better software.
Can I ask, Cody, what do how do feature flags, for instance, play a role in all of, in software supply chain security?
I think what's really interesting about like the feature flag world is thinking that when I think a lot about like features, my definition of this has changed quite a bit, especially in recent years, right? Because I think that oftentimes the person consuming the feature might not actually be your typical customer that's coming in. So you run a large e-commerce website, the person who consumes a feature might very well not be the customer coming in from that website. It could be the security team who's wanting to make sure that your secrets management platform's been implemented correctly, or that they're in the midst of changing secrets management platforms. And that feature might not be one that your customers externally care about, but it's certainly one that the security team cares about. And I think about the way we roll out functionality, because like functionality is just another way of saying a feature. It's just a different way of thinking about it. And I think we see feature flags and that concept shifting a little bit more to how are we exposing broader functionality into a platform. Using the security example, when somebody wants to roll out secrets management for the first time, and they want to have a smaller group of people receive that configuration, that's a way to create progression as opposed to just flipping it on for everybody at the same time, right? Like there's 5 of us on this call. We could group all of this together and have us being the ones who are getting that secrets management configuration via flag config. And there's one angle of that of saying, oh, look, LaunchDarkly is the greatest at doing this thing, but more thinking about like that DevOps style approach of how do I gradually allow people to adopt this? How do I gradually set this up so that I can validate that smaller groups are getting this before I drop this huge platform in front of everybody? I think that people are looking at ways to have security or other adjacent aspects of our DevOpsy world have that same experience of progressive rollout and gradual rollout that is trackable, measurable, back outable, if that's a phrase.
Back outable. Schmear left and be back outable.
We're all 2 or 3 failed deployments from being schmeared left. So,
before, we only have a few minutes left, but I would like to go from Steve to Margaret and finish it with Rachel. And Steve, I have a question about GitOps and all this.
Sure.
GitOps is really Kubernetes focused, and but the question is about, when we think about infrastructure, as code, there's also now this, this thinking about, infrastructure as almost preparedness, as security, right? Where there's and it has the same principles. So, but how are you gonna, one of the questions I have is about how this synchronization of the software supply chain. This seems to be a frontier that I think very few people understand, and I'm curious in your thoughts on it.
I mean, I think you can, if you abstract some of the parts of GitOps, what you're really talking about is being able to have a plan of record to determine the specific version and have a code against that, the SHA from Git that you're running in production, and have a reconciliation loop. So ultimately a loop reporting back on that. And from what Rachel was saying, I think like the situation for software teams is that the complexity is ramping up, and we actually know less about how to run things now than we did 10 years ago. As in, we're now running hundreds of services that are put together to create services, and that just adds complexity. So, there are lessons to be learned there. And I think as you think about security, what you're really talking about in the shift left situation is that anything where you don't know the precise version and you have that in a SHA, or you have that in some sort of Git configuration, and I'm specifically talking about the SHA, which provides you with security, then, if you don't know the specific version you're supposed to be running in production, in testing, in dev, you want to shift that left, so that at the end of the day, you have a sort of complete plan of record through the entire development pipeline, and you have a reconciliation loop, an automated reconciliation loop, whether that's on Kubernetes or some other system, so that ultimately a computer system is comparing for you whether what you're running in each of those stages is what you were expecting to run. And that's going to bring security benefits,
Margaret, from the kitchen, quick.
I would say that the security question is real, and it is an impediment to velocity in most of the organizations that we work with, because what is happening now is people want a big red button that says no. Till security is satisfied, this is a no. And now we have to develop the process. Like, do we have the right licenses? Do we have a vuln? Is there like a patch we need to do? Do we know all the things? And then we can kind of manually let deployments roll. And we're at the beginning of the journey where we start to automate that and develop tooling around it and go from a big red manual button to a business process to tools that do the diff on the SHA you expect versus the SHA that you have running, right, in production, or if that's how you want to treat it. Like, this is verified. Security said yes to this one. We know all the dependencies. We know the libraries. There's no problem here. We can just roll. So we're at the beginning of that automation journey. And what I see most of the security teams asking for right now is give me like the no. I want to know. And then slowly we're gonna get better at the tools.
Rachel, let's close it out. Schmear left. What are we seeing here? I'm thinking cloud-based IDEs where it's all programmed for you and you can work in the same environment as security. I'm sure you have your own thoughts and perspective.
I think, as ever, for the analyst answer, it's going to be, it depends. I think it's going to depend on your development shop. I think it's going to depend on where you're at in your progression in terms of the specific tools and implementations you need. But I think in the end, it really does come back to making sure that you have made it as easy as possible for everyone to comply with what you want to happen. So like if people need to go fast, if their goal and tasks are on going fast and on velocity, and you're also trying to incorporate security, you need to have those in alignment. Otherwise, people are going to choose fast.
Wonderful. Well, I want to thank everyone for showing up for the Pancake Breakfast. I want to thank our guest, Cody De Arkland, Rachel Stevens, Steve George, Margaret Francis. Thank you so much. And thank you very much to LaunchDarkly, who made this breakfast possible. I've really enjoyed this conversation. It's been very lively. Thanks to all the people out there who asked your questions. I can't wait for the next pancake breakfast. Have a great conference at Trajectory, and let those spatulas fly. Let's give it all everyone a big hand. I really am very happy. Yeah. All right. Thanks, everyone. We'll talk soon.